Welcome back to Jacques in the Garden. Today we are doing the great bean experiment, and it's all been spurred on by this bean bed right here. You can see I'm kicking them because I'm not pleased with how these beans have been doing. So this year we've had essentially zero green bean production. I've been trying to figure out why that is, and I'm not really sure. So in order to fully understand what's going on, whether it's a disease issue, watering issue, nutrient issue, I ended up starting 10 different bean varieties. So I went to Johnny's Select Seeds. I looked at every bean variety they had a disease resistance, and I ordered it. But first we're gonna actually rip out these beans, replace it with something else. I'm probably gonna put some Determinate tomatoes and a summer zucchini squash in here. And then we're gonna move over to that bed in the back, amend it, and plant out a bunch of different beans, talk about the varieties and exactly what my strategies are to try to prevent the problem that I had right here. Before we do anything else, what we need to do is actually remove these beans. And while it is really tempting to just come in, grab the bean plants and yank them right out, I wanna make sure I leave all of these roots in the ground in particular. So while they didn't really produce, sometimes they kind of flowered and then the flowers wilted off. So if they flowered, to me, that means that they have actually started producing some amount of root nodules, and that's gonna leave a lot of nitrogen behind. So I wanna make sure that I'm saving all those nutrients in the soil rather than actually removing it from the soil. So what I'll do here is I'll actually go ahead and pull one of these plants. So what I'm looking at are these little balls that are hanging on the roots right here. So there's an example of one right there. They basically look like a bunch of tiny little BBs attached to the roots themselves. If I were to grab one of these clusters and try to pop it, you can see it's full of juice, and they have a slightly pink color. It's kind of hard to tell because it's covered in dirt, but this is all of the nutrients. So this is actually a ton of nitrogen locked into the soil. And so that when they say that you don't get the benefits of the root nodules unless you leave the roots in the ground, this is what they mean. Because if I were to just pull this out, I'm pulling out all those nutrients with me. And just because I'm growing beans doesn't mean that the nutrients are available to the plants immediately. They have to decompose from these nodules first. So we're gonna cut all these roots at the base. They probably won't feed the plants I put in directly right now, but they will in the future. I'm gonna actually just take some pruners and cut every single plant at the base, leaving all of that intact. So I could have waited longer and longer for this bean bed to finally produce. And it looks like some of them were starting to barely produce, but the plants themselves don't even look good anymore. So at this point, I'm over it. I'm not willing to wait any longer for this bed to fix itself. Instead, I'm going to just restart and grow in a different bed to try to avoid whatever problem was in here. So the only thing left in the bed now are these couple of zinnias and one of these Brussels sprouts. This was a Brussels sprout that I had cut at the base, and it actually regrew. So I decided to leave it to try to push it in for a winter harvest. So all of this green matter from the beans is 100% going in the compost. It looks actually good. I don't really see disease, which is a little frustrating because it's like, what's the issue then? So let's bring in a little bit closer and try to look in the soil to see if there's anything obvious going on. So I see a ton of roly-polies. I don't really have a reason to worry about that because usually they will only eat the seedlings, not the fully grown plants. So I'm not sure if that would cause any issues. Overall, the soil moisture actually looks pretty dang good. So I guess that's good. It's still a little bit frustrating because I'm not entirely sure what went wrong with those beans. So I'm gonna go grab those tomatoes and the squash, and we'll plant those in, talk a little bit about Determinate tomatoes, and then move on to the back so that we could get these beans in the ground. So before we do that, we're going to swap out the irrigation in this bed. I'm going to be using a pressure compensating line, and I'm going to be using these twist lock connectors. These are great because it's a lot easier to remove and attach tubing in the future. This is going to connect to a section of main line, which is connected to the original section of main line, and that's how water will get to this bed. I'm also going to attach another tube of main line to push irrigation to the next bed over. Now, down the middle is going to be actual drip emitter. So this tube looks the same, but it actually has the emitters at 9-inch spacing. That's going to run straight down the middle and then tee off to 2 other elbows, which will provide 3 total drip lines in this bed for full saturation. Each tube I'm going to actually seal with electrical tape, which is the cheapest way to do it. And you can see it is indeed dripping water. Here's a close-up of the drippers dripping. So you can see they're all facing up and they are all bubbling out some water. So this is exactly what we want to see. And what's going to happen is it'll come down, hit the straw, and the straw will help distribute it even more. The other thing I wanted to point out is that you can see I have a dripper here, and then that one splits the difference. This creates the most even watering field that you can get. So you want to make sure that these emitters aren't in line because it's just going to create dry spots in between. So I have 1, 2, 3 Determinate tomatoes. They're all of the Roma variety. I decided to just purchase these at the nursery because I found I actually didn't have any Determinate tomato seed. So that's going to be a problem I have to fix for next year. But what we're going to do now is prepare the soil. Because of these past issues, I want to make sure that I have enough fertility in here. So what I'm going to do is actually dig in a little bit. I'm seeing this kind of worm casting like texture again. And the other thing I'm noticing is that the soil is sufficiently moist. So it's not a soil moisture issue, which is surprising. That's one of the reasons I swapped the irrigation, but it should work better anyway. I am seeing some small grubs here. Some people say all grubs are the bad kind, but these are actually the cut worms. So these will actually kill your seedlings. These are bad. I don't want them in my bed. So I'm gonna actually probably toss them aside and maybe let the chickens get them later. Back to the task at hand. We're gonna be planting Determinate tomatoes. So I don't wanna strip too much off them. I'll probably just plant it at soil level here. And what I'm going to do is use our favorite tomato fertilizer, which is Tomato Tone. The nice thing about Tomato Tone is that it has, let's see the breakdown again. It is 3, 4, 6, and that's what you want to see for a tomato. You want nitrogen to be the lowest number, and you want the pK to be the highest numbers. That's because tomatoes are a fruiting plant, so you don't want to grow a lot of leaves. What you want to grow are a lot of roots and a lot of fruits, which is the P and K. So I'm going to mix it in with the soil a little bit because I don't want to plant directly on top of fertilizer. And then what I have here is the worm gold worm castings mixed with a bunch of azomite or earth dust. Again, I'm hedging all my bets in this bed because I had such poor performance from those beans that I'm thinking it could be a micronutrient issue. I just want to solve everything I can. So let's go ahead and pop this out. I'm still going to actually remove this lowest growth because that's just going to be on the ground anyway. And even though it's Determinate, I'm okay sacrificing a little bit of growth there for overall health. Come back around, bury this. And the way I planted it, it's actually in between 2 drip emitters here, and then there's a third one there, and another one there and there. So it should branch out and reach all those emitters over its life. Now I'm going to plant the other 2 and a squash at the end, and I'll come back in and throw some cages on these. And yes, this is the only time I really use cages anymore is for Determinate tomatoes. So again, usually never bother using these. For a Determinate tomato, it kind of makes sense. It's just big enough to actually support them, and they do benefit from some support, otherwise they'll just kind of be all over the place. Now I actually don't have that many cages, so on this one I have 2 extremely short cages, which would probably work relatively well for something like peppers, but I'm gonna go ahead and just double cage this tomato. One will be taller, the other one will be wider. Overall, it should give me enough support. And then for this last one, I have a giant cage. It's just what I have available. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw that in. Now we've got 3 tomato cages and we can actually get over to these beans. And we have some amending to do there, so let's go start. So this is going to be the home of the Great Bean Experiment. Hopefully this will satisfy the requirements needed. I think part of the issue was light, so I'm not sure how much more light I'm getting over here, but I will be able to better control the nutrients. I have a bigger space, and I have way more varieties. So if it's a varietal issue, I'll figure that out. If it's something else, if they all fail again, then I've got a bigger problem to solve. But before we actually get all these in the ground, let's go ahead and fix up this bed, amend it. This was previously growing corn. Corn is considered a heavy feeder, so that means we're going to want to actually incorporate some more fertility into this bed. And I'm probably going to do it using fertilizer because my compost is essentially all gone. So let's move this irrigation out of the way. We might swap that, but since I already showed you guys one example, I probably won't show another. So let's go ahead and clean this bed up a little bit first, and then we'll take a look at amending it. As I mentioned earlier, corn is a heavy feeder. So what I'm going to do is actually, instead of doing my lasagna bed, because I just don't have any spare compost, I'm going to move off the straw, and then we're going to be using this Biotone starter fertilizer. The Biotone is great because it has pretty much all the basic nutrients that you need. It also has a lot of inoculant in there, things that are beneficial to your soil, like bacterial and mycorrhizal elements. So we're gonna move this so we could get directly contacting against the soil. We don't wanna spread the fertilizer on top of the actual straw itself. So the directions for the Biotone is 12 cups per 100 square feet. If I had to guess, I'd say this is probably 8 by 4 feet, which means it's about 32 square feet. So I need about a third of what they're calling for, which is like a cup and a third. So I'm gonna just try to do that with this scoop here. I'm gonna assume that this is roughly 12 ounces, and then I'll distribute that across my bed. Now I'm gonna come in and use the back of my fork here to just kind of smoothly push it into the soil without having to dig that much into it. That should be good enough for now. I'm actually going to wait and put all the straw on after we plant our beans. So now I need to think about where these beans are gonna go exactly. Maybe I'll draw out little grids and keep all the bean species or the bean varieties within that grid. So I'm gonna actually probably measure this out and try to be a little bit exact about it. So this is what I ended up building. This is the least efficient irrigation manifold somebody could design, but I wanted to have a separate line for each bean to give them all a fair chance. So the way it's working, the reason why it's so inefficient is that over there it tees off the main line and it comes up as one piece, and every single one of these lines needs a T connector. Each T connector is quite expensive overall compared to the rest of everything you would use for an irrigation build. So this is pretty pricey, pretty inefficient, but now I have really nice consistent moisture. Every single bean will have its own dedicated line. And here we are, it's working. Everything's dripping according to plan. So now we've got the beans over there and we're gonna go plant them right now. Okay, the great bean trial can now finally commence. The bed is prepared, the irrigation is in place. Nothing is stopping us now. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay out the varieties in question. This is Velour Bush. I believe it's a purple bean. Compass Bush. These are all bush beans, so I'll stop saying bush. Tobago, Bamco, or Bamako, sorry. Rock D'Or, that's a golden kind of yellow wax bean. Provider, that's a classic. I have high hopes for that one. Amethyst Bush is another purple. Then we've got Goldilocks. I'm guessing that's gonna be a yellow bean. And the last one here is Jade, which had the worst germination, only 3. I guess there's another one coming up and this one kind of killed itself. So I'm gonna say that only 3 came up. So that's the actual bean trial itself. On the back here, I have runner beans that aren't doing that well, which begs the question why I'm planting here anyway. But I think a lot of the reason why that didn't do well is because that tall corn was right here for so long that it blocked a lot of their light. So I'm actually not worried about it. I think they'll make a full recovery. The other thing I have is all of the bean seed that I actually sowed. So I wanted to have it all at the ready because I'm basically going to be putting in 12 beans on each line. So each line is about 4 feet. And that means that if it's 4 feet, divide that by 4-inch spacing and you've got 12. So I want 12 beans on each line and they're all going to be essentially 10 inches apart, which is how far I had these drip lines. Ideally, they'd probably have more space between rows, but I think since I'm doing pretty general wide spacing, it should work out fine. So I'm gonna plant as many as I can here and then fill in the gaps with the seeds. Now we've transplanted all those beans. That took a lot longer than I was expecting, but now we have to sow the rest of the patch. So what I'm gonna try to do here is take this cobra head and make a furrow. So I'm gonna just drag this along, right along my drip line. What this does is it creates a nice narrow little gap that I could just drop my beans right into. And then I'll just push the soil right over and that's it. velour bush bean from Johnny's. All these seeds were from Johnny's this time. And I'm going to put 2 seeds into each cell. I'm going to use this bean inoculant on the seeds as well. The way this works is that it's supposed to have the bacteria that helps legumes, beans, actually fix nitrogen to create their own soil nitrogen to create more beans, basically. And this is something that is backed by some sort of study showing that you do get more of a harvest. It's totally unnecessary. In fact, I've never bothered with it before, but I saw it on the site while I was ordering these beans. So I figured, you know what? I keep hearing about this, I might as well try it. So here we are trying it. I've got to admit, this experiment took a lot longer to set up than I thought it would. So here I am. Final touches here is I'm going to do a just surface layer of straw. I don't want to go too deep because I want the seedlings to be able to push through. I'm just doing this to lock in some of that moisture. But that's it for today, guys. I hope you guys learned something along the way, and I'll see you guys next time.